The unwelcome ambassador, the crystalline halls of the Zenthara Galactic Academy gleamed under artificial starlight, casting prismatic reflections across walls that had witnessed 1,000 species share their wisdom. Today, however, the prestigious lecture hall buzzed with an unusual mixture of curiosity and disdain. Word had spread quickly through the corridors. A representative from the infamous Class 5, Deathworld, would be addressing the Academy's finest. Mind's Professor Zethkar, a towering Vortanian with obsidian skin and silver neural filaments, observed the gathering crowd with barely concealed amusement. His students, future diplomats, xenobiologists, and military strategists from 17 different star systems, whispered among themselves in dozens of languages. The Catherian delegation fluttered their gossamer wings nervously, while the hulking Goravani representatives crossed their forearms skeptically. "Settle down," Zethkar commanded, his voice carrying the authority of centuries. "Today we welcome our guest speaker from Sol 3, commonly known as Earth. I trust you've all reviewed the preliminary files on this Class 5 Deathworld." A ripple of laughter swept through the auditorium. The Goravani student Krexter, whose homeworld boasted gravity 3 times Earth's standard, snorted audibly. A backwater rock that only recently discovered faster-than-light communication? What could these primitives possibly teach us about survival? The massive doors at the chamber's rear hissed open, and silence fell like a curtain. The human who entered was decidedly unremarkable by galactic standards. No towering height, no natural armor, no obvious weapons or defensive adaptations. Dr. Lena Mercer stood barely 5.5 feet tall, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing what appeared to be standard academic robes. She carried only a small data pad and a worn leather satchel. "Primitive," whispered Kelmera, a Nexari student whose species had mastered interstellar travel before humans had discovered fire. "Look at her, no carapace, no energy shields, not even basic genetic modifications. How did such a fragile species survive on a Deathworld?" Lena walked to the podium with steady confidence, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the alien faces studying her like a curious specimen. She activated the holographic display system and the Academy's advanced technology, responded to her touch as if recognizing something familiar in her presence. "Good afternoon," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the translator matrices. "I'm Dr. Lena Mercer, Earth's first cultural ambassador to the Galactic Council. I've been asked to speak about my homeworld today specifically, about what it means to be human on a Class 5 Deathworld." Professor Zethkar leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite himself by the human's composure. Behind Lena, the holographic display shimmered to life, showing a blue-green marble suspended in the darkness of space. Earth looked deceptively peaceful. From this distance, its swirling clouds and vast oceans hiding the truth beneath. "Let's begin with what you already know," Lena continued, her tone conversational yet purposeful. "Earth has been classified as uninhabitable by galactic standards. For good reason." The expected horrors, the holographic display shifted, and suddenly the lecture hall was filled with the raw power of Earth's natural fury. Hurricane winds screamed across vast oceans, their spiral arms visible from space as they gathered strength to devastate continents. Lightning split the darkness in violent cascades, illuminating storm clouds that dwarfed entire cities. The alien students watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as tornadoes carved paths of destruction across endless plains. "Category 5 hurricanes," Lena explained calmly, gesturing to the swirling mass of destruction. "Winds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour, capable of leveling structures that would be considered fortress-grade on most inhabited worlds. They occur regularly during our storm seasons." The display shifted to show volcanic eruptions molten, rock fountaining thousands of meters into the air, while pyroclastic flows raced down mountainsides at impossible speeds. The Cytherian delegation fluttered their wings anxiously as they watched forests disappear beneath walls of superheated gas and ash. Our planet's crust floats on an ocean of molten rock, Lena continued matter-of-factly. We have over 1,500 active volcanoes, and they've been reshaping our world and challenging our survival for millions of years. Krexter shifted uncomfortably as the hologram displayed massive polar regions locked in ice, where temperatures plummeted to levels that would instantly freeze most known biological compounds. And yet, Lena noted, observing the Garvani's reaction, humans have established permanent settlements in both polar regions, including research stations where scientists live for months in complete darkness. The images transitioned to Earth's predators, great white sharks with rows of serrated teeth, Siberian tigers stalking through snow-covered forests, crocodiles that had remained unchanged since the age of dinosaurs. A collective murmur rose from the audience as they witnessed the casual deadliness of Earth's ecosystem. These are our neighbors, Lena said simply. Every continent harbors apex predators that consider humans potential prey. Our oceans contain creatures capable of swallowing small spacecraft whole, and our forests hide venomous species that can kill with a single bite. Kelmira leaned toward her companion, whispering, "How did they survive without retreating underground or developing natural defenses? Look at them. They're barely more durable than young Nexari larvae." The display showed more poisonous plants that could kill with casual contact, desert regions where surface temperatures exceeded the boiling point of water, and deep ocean trenches where pressure would crush most galactic exploration vehicles like paper shells. Each image reinforced the audience's preconceptions about primitive survival on a hostile world. "Your preliminary files were correct," Lena acknowledged, reading the room's mixture of pity and dismissive superiority. "Earth is indeed a class. 5 Deathworld. The environment is relentlessly hostile, the weather patterns are extreme, and the indigenous life forms are exceptionally dangerous." Professor Zethkar nodded approvingly. This was exactly what he'd expected: a catalog of natural hazards that explained why humans had developed so slowly compared to species from more hospitable worlds. The human was confirming everything the galactic community already believed about Deathworld inhabitants, that they were tough but simple, survivors but not innovators. However, Lena said, her tone shifting subtly as the holographic display faded to black, those environmental challenges are not what made Earth truly dangerous. True Deathworld lecture hall fell silent as the holographic display reignited, but the images that emerged were far more disturbing than any natural disaster. Ancient battlefields stretched across the visual space, thousands of armored figures clashing with bronze weapons under smoke-darkened skies. The metallic ring of swords and the screams of the dying echoed through the Academy's sophisticated audio systems. "This is the Battle of Cani, 216 BCE by our calendar," Lena explained, her voice taking on the measured tone of a historian. "In a single day, roughly 70,000 human beings killed each other using nothing but muscle power and sharpened metal. The victorious General Hannibal accomplished this with tactical brilliance that military academies still study today." The Cytherian delegation recoiled as the display showed the aftermath fields carpeted with bodies, rivers running red, and survivors methodically stripping the dead of anything useful. Krexter's confident smirk had vanished, replaced by a growing unease as he began to understand that this wasn't ancient history to the human. It was a lesson. "Warfare," Lena continued, "advancing through centuries of human conflict, became our primary driver of innovation. We developed metallurgy not for tools, but for better weapons. We mastered chemistry not for medicine, but for explosives. We conquered the skies not for exploration, but to rain death from above." The images shifted to show World War I endless Trenches scarred across continents, poison gas drifting over no man's land, and artillery barrages that could be heard hundreds of kilometers away. The alien students watched in horrified fascination as human armies hurled themselves against fortified positions, dying in millions, yet never surrendering. In 4 years, Lena said quietly, we killed 20 million of our own species. We poisoned entire regions with chemical weapons, perfected the art of mass slaughter, and then when it was over we called it the war to end all wars. Professor Zethkar felt his neural filaments tingling with alarm. This wasn't the primitive survival story he'd expected. The scale of organized violence was staggering, but what troubled him more was the clinical way the human discussed it, as if analyzing weather patterns rather than describing genocide. 21 years later, Lena continued, we proved ourselves wrong. World War II involved 100 million casualties. We industrialized death, built factories dedicated to extermination, and developed weapons capable of destroying entire cities in seconds. The hologram showed mushroom clouds rising over urban centers, their terrible beauty highlighting the moment humanity had learned to split atoms not for energy, but for annihilation. The silence in the lecture hall was deafening as the audience contemplated a species that had weaponized the fundamental forces of the universe. But perhaps most remarkable, Lena said, her eyes scanning the stunned faces before her, was what happened next. Within decades of nearly destroying ourselves, we turned that same devastating knowledge toward peaceful purposes. Nuclear power plants lit our cities. Rocket technology born from weapons programs carried us to other worlds. The same industrial capacity that had produced implements of war now created medicines, communications networks, and eventually, she gestured around the academy, brought us here. Kalmira's voice was barely audible through her translator. They fought themselves. And won? Time and time again, Lena confirmed. We survived ice ages, volcanic winters, pandemic diseases that killed a third of our population, and countless natural disasters. But our greatest challenge was always ourselves, and somehow it made us stronger. The display faded again, leaving the audience in contemplative darkness as they processed the implications of what they'd witnessed. The unbroken will, the holographic display, blazed back to life. But now it showed something different, something that made the assembled aliens lean forward in their seats with a mixture of awe and disbelief. The images depicted humans in environments that should have been impossible to survive. Astronauts floating in the deadly vacuum of space, deep-sea explorers descending to ocean floors where pressure would liquefy most known life forms, and researchers working calmly in radiation zones that would be lethal to nearly every galactic species. This is Neil Armstrong, Lena said, highlighting a figure in a primitive-looking spacesuit standing on a gray, airless landscape. In 1969, barely 66 years after we achieved powered flight, he became the first human to walk on our moon. He did. This in a suit that wouldn't meet modern safety standards for a simple EVA exercise, using computers less powerful than the translation device in your pocket. The Gorvani student Krekster found his voice, though it cracked slightly. Impossible. The radiation exposure alone should have killed them. How did they survive without proper shielding? They didn't survive it, Lena replied matter-of-factly. Many of our early space pioneers developed cancers and died young. We knew the risks. We went anyway. She gestured to another image showing a primitive space station. We built orbital habitats knowing they might become tombs. We sent humans to live in environments where a single equipment failure meant certain death, and they lined up to volunteer. The display shifted to show underwater exploration humans in bulky suits walking along the ocean floor near thermal vents where temperatures exceeded 400 degrees Celsius. Strange, alien-looking creatures moved through the superheated water around them while the explorers calmly collected samples. The deepest parts of our oceans, Lena explained, remained unexplored longer than the surface of our moon. The pressure at these depths would crush your most advanced submarines, yet humans found ways to go there anyway. We discovered entire ecosystems thriving in conditions that shouldn't support life, and we studied them up close. Professor Zethkar watched a video of human children playing in what appeared to be a radiation-contaminated zone, their laughter echoing strangely through the Academy's speakers. "These young ones," he asked carefully, "they're in immediate danger?" "That footage is from Chernobyl," Lena replied. "The site of our worst nuclear accident. Yes, they're in danger. But humans returned to live there anyway, not because they had to, but because it was home. Today, the exclusion zone has become an accidental nature preserve where wildlife thrives." The images continued. Cities built in deserts, where surface temperatures regularly exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. Settlements constructed on active fault lines. Communities that rebuilt repeatedly after hurricanes, floods, and earthquakes. Each scene showed humans not just surviving impossible conditions, but thriving in them. "This is what your files don't capture," Lena said, her voice carrying a quiet intensity that held the entire auditorium spellbound. Every natural disaster, every war, every plague or famine or catastrophe, we survived them all. Not by running away or hiding underground, but by adapting, by becoming something harder to kill. The final image showed a rescue operation, humans wading into floodwaters during a hurricane to save animals from a zoo, risking their own lives for creatures that couldn't even comprehend the danger. The alien audience watched in stunned silence as these supposedly primitive beings demonstrated a concept that few galactic species had ever mastered: voluntary self-sacrifice for the benefit of others. "We didn't just survive the Deathworld," Lena concluded, her words falling into absolute silence. "We made it ours. Every challenge made us stronger. Every catastrophe taught us something new. And every threat we couldn't avoid, we learned to overcome." She paused, scanning the faces of her audience, noting the shift from dismissive superiority to something approaching respect and perhaps fear. "That brings me to my final point." The classified truth. The auditorium had fallen into a silence so complete that the ambient hum of the Academy's life support systems seemed deafening. Lena stood at the podium, studying the faces of her audience, no longer dismissive or amused, but attentive with an edge of unease that hadn't been there an hour ago. "I see some skepticism remaining," she observed, her gaze settling on Krexter, whose Gorvani pride had been visibly shaken, but not entirely broken. "You're thinking that survival against natural disasters, and even warfare, doesn't necessarily translate to true strength. After all, many species have overcome adversity." Krexter straightened in his seat, his forearms crossing defiantly. "Exactly. Your species may be resilient, I'll grant that. But resilience isn't the same as capability. You've told us about surviving your own world's challenges, but that hardly proves you're ready for what exists beyond it." A few other students nodded agreement, and Lena could see the moment, the line between respect and true understanding that she needed to cross. She reached into her worn leather satchel and withdrew a small, classified data chip that bore the seal of the Terran Colonial Authority. "You're absolutely right, Krexter," she said quietly. "Surviving Earth only prepared us for the first test." She inserted the chip into the podium system, and new authorization protocols flashed across the display. "What I'm about to show you is classified footage from our colonial efforts. Until 3 days ago, only the highest levels of the Galactic Council had access to this information." Professor Zethkar felt his neural filaments bristling with alarm. "Dr. Mercer, I'm not certain this Academy has clearance for." "It does now." Lena interrupted softly. "The Council voted unanimously to declassify this material after our admission to observer status. They decided it was important for the galactic community to understand what humans are capable of. The holographic display showed star charts marking several systems beyond the traditional boundaries of explored space. One system in particular was highlighted in ominous red warning symbols, Kepler 442, classified as an experimental colony. Site for extreme adaptation testing. Kepler 442b, Lena explained, is a Class 6 Deathworld. It doesn't exist on your standard classification scale because until recently, no known species had ever successfully established a foothold there. The planet's surface gravity is twice Earth's standard. Its atmosphere is toxic to most carbon-based life, and it's home to indigenous predators that make Earth's dinosaurs look like house pets. The footage began grainy, emergency broadcast quality. Images from helmet cameras and security systems. A human colony of perhaps 200 individuals was shown under attack by something that defied easy description. The creatures moved with impossible speed and coordination, their chitinous forms adapting in real time to whatever weapons the colonists deployed. "This is the Kepler incident," Lena said, her voice steady despite the carnage playing out before them. First contact with a truly hostile alien intelligence. These entities, we call them adapters, had wiped out 3 previous galactic survey teams. Advanced Fortanian warriors, Nexari combat specialists, even a Gorvani battle group. All eliminated. Within hours of planetfall, the alien students watched in growing horror as the adapters overwhelmed defensive positions that should have been impregnable. Energy weapons proved useless as the creature's shells adapted to absorb or reflect the blasts. Kinetic barriers were torn apart by limbs that reconfigured themselves into perfect penetration tools. The evacuation ships were 3 days out, Lena continued. Standard protocol called for the colonists to retreat to emergency shelters and wait for rescue. Instead, the footage showed something that would become legend among military historians across the galaxy. Human colonists, farmers, engineers, teachers, children barely old enough to hold tools began fighting back with improvised weapons. Kitchen knives duct-taped to metal poles. Farming equipment converted into crude artillery. Household chemicals mixed into explosives. "They fought back," whispered Kelmira, her voice filled with disbelief. "With primitive weapons. Against creatures that had defeated our best military units. For 72 hours, Lena confirmed. They held the line using nothing but determination, creativity, and an absolutely terrifying refusal to accept defeat. They studied the adapters' behavior patterns during combat, identified weaknesses in real time, and developed countermeasures, using whatever materials they could find. The final scenes were the most disturbing, not because of violence, but because of what they represented. The rescue ships arrived to find the colony not just intact, but expanding. The humans had not merely survived. They had turned the tables completely. Adapter carcasses were being studied in makeshift laboratories while human children played in areas that had been active battlefields days earlier. Krexter slowly sank back into his seat, his natural Gorvani confidence completely shattered. Around the lecture hall, similar scenes played out as the implications became clear. The Galactic Council, Lena said, powering down the display, spent 6 months debating whether to classify humans as a potential threat species. They ultimately decided that any beings capable of this level of adaptation and aggression would be better as allies than enemies. She gathered her materials, slinging the worn satchel over her shoulder. So yes, Earth is a death world. But it didn't make us primitive. Her eyes swept across the stunned audience one final time. It made us human. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have a cultural exchange program to organize. It seems several species have requested permission to study our survival methodologies. As Lena walked toward the exit, The lecture hall remained frozen in absolute silence until Krexter's voice, barely audible through his translator, broke. The spell, by the void... They didn't survive the Deathworld. They made it scared of them. The massive doors closed behind Earth's first ambassador, leaving the galaxy's finest minds to contemplate a new and humbling truth. Sometimes, the most dangerous predator is the one that doesn't look dangerous at all.